It was the town of 5,000 souls' first newspaper, and its list of original subscribers blended aristocrat and journeyman in a true reflection of the democratic spirit about to surface in the restless British colony.
James Edwards, breeches maker.
Jacob Myers, saddler.
Charles Carroll, barrister at law.
Absalom Bonham.
Most were just ordinary people, people who wanted to know what was happening in their city.
He carries every point, who blends the useful with the agreeable, amusing his reader while he instructs him.
With these words and this promise, on August 20th, 1773, began the Baltimore News-American, a newspaper that is also an uninterrupted 200-year diary of the average Baltimorean's comic and tragic encounters with fate, nature, and other men.
Great, we were told, was the rejoicing when the news, the scandal, and all the convenience of the paper were brought within easy reach of the good townsfolk.
That very first issue contained an ad describing in great detail, for the benefit of readers, the attractions of newly surveyed land to the west near Fort Pitt in Pennsylvania.
Any person inclinable to settle on these lands may be more fully informed of the terms by applying to the subscriber.
The name at the bottom of the ad, George Washington, Mount Vernon, in Virginia. When the Baltimore News-American's first editor, William Goddard, published his Opus 1 on that day in 1773, a minority of the citizenry was committed either to the British Crown or to the new radical spirit of revolution and independence. But the average man was often just confused or uncommitted.
October 14th, 1774. One Anthony Stewart, a merchant of Annapolis, became the subject of great controversy when it was discovered that his vessel, Peggy Stewart, arrived with a cargo of that detestable weed, tea.
History has proven that the unfortunate Anthony Stewart knew nothing of his ship's cargo until it landed at Annapolis. But his seeming defiance of the colonial boycott on tea made him a villain in the eyes of many. And there was nothing he could do to prove his innocence except...
He must burn his ship, the whole thing.
Gentlemen, in Boston less than a year ago, it was sufficient that the cargo be dumped into the bay.
He must burn the ship. He must go aboard and set fire to her himself.
Please, my wife is upstairs in a delicate condition. We are expecting our 6th child at any moment.
The ship must be burned.
Thus, Anthony Stewart became one of the first economic victims of the Revolutionary War. History was taking place in the streets of Baltimore, but the man in the street wasn't always concerned with history.
October 30th, 1773. A few nights ago, about 12 o'clock, a window of the apartment in which Captain George Buchanan of this town was asleep was opened by one of our nocturnal adventurers, who, putting in his arm, made prize, and expecting further plunder, was preparing to get into the room, which the captain's awaking and advancing towards the window fortunately prevented.
An indignant letter to the editor in that same issue called attention to other problems in the streets.
Sir, I undertake to point out sundry abuses which call for immediate reliefs. Mountains of rubbish, stone, bricks, etc., laying for months together in our streets, to the great hindrance of passengers and carriages. Our market crowded with the tables of gingerbread and apple hawkers, so as often to render it impassable. Blasphemy, drunkenness, and pilfering practiced under our instant notice by vagabonds who are suffered to lurk about the marketplace day and night, a scene obnoxious to age as it is dangerous to our youth. Whether these nuisances deserve public notice, I submit to you and am, sir, your friend, a fellow inhabitant.
Obviously, the words of an angry Baltimore resident, as also are these.
April 26th, 1775. Public notice.
Elizabeth, wife of the subscriber, having eloped and otherwise misbehaved. This is to warn all persons not to trust her on my account, as I will not pay any debts of her contracting from the date hereof.
And it wasn't exactly a happy time when the first officially authorized copies of the Declaration of Independence, with the names of its signers, were printed by the News-American.
The 13 United States of America have declared independency in Congress July 4th, 1776.
It could have been the publication of a hangman's list, but it didn't turn out that way. And when the peace was won, Baltimoreans settled down to a way of life that, if not luxurious, was at least pleasant and full of surprises. A Frenchman became the first aeronaut of the world by making a manned flight near Paris. Now it was America's turn.
June 24th, 1784. Yesterday, the ingenious Peter Carnes, Esquire, made his curious aerostatic experiments within the limits of this town, in the presence of a numerous and respectable congress of people, who generally appeared delighted with the awful grandeur of a large globe, making repeated voyages into the airy region, which Mr. Carnes' machine actually performed.
Look, it's moving. The balloon's leaving the ground.
The question is, how are they going to get back?
Perhaps the article was the work of still another News-American first, Mary Catherine Goddard, the first woman editor, who took over for Brother William before the Revolution and ran the paper on and off until the end of the century. It is certainly not difficult to detect a woman's tender touch in this account of the 1786 Jones Falls flood.
There are few pens in any degree capable of giving a just description of so awful a scene, and which so strikingly evidences the power of that great being who bade the waters flow. On Friday afternoon, this community were deeply affected by the loss of a valuable member of society in the bloom of life, John Boyce, Esquire, attorney at law, who, in attempting to cross Jones Falls in his carriage, was suddenly and awfully hurled down the rapid current into the ocean of eternity, in the presence of several of his friends, whose endeavors to save him unhappily proved fruitless.
It was not a time during which the average man could be complacent about the prospects of achieving his 70 years. It may have been with this thought in mind that Baltimore City organized its Department of Health in 1793, which was later to earn the distinction of being the oldest continuous municipal health department in the United States, if not the world. But it could do little then to prevent the frequent epidemics that ravaged the city, as yellow fever did in 1794, let alone help the average man with other highly irritating problems.
May 16th, 1799. An advertisement.
Valuable medicines just received. Sovereign ointment for the itch. Warranted an infallible and immediate cure at once.
Sometimes man found distraction from his own problems in the problems of others.
May 20th, 1799. New novels, Santa Maria or the Mysterious Pregnancy, in 3 volumes.
A simple man, the average Baltimorean of the 1790s, was eager to be entertained.
Come see the African lion, which is on view at the sign of the Black Horse, opposite the Center Market.
Even if it meant possible damnation.
January 4th, 1812. Petition to the mayor of Baltimore signed by 279 citizens.
All exhibitions of the theater, circus, and all others of like character are injurious to religion, morality, good order, and life.
That's the way some people thought. But Baltimore was a big city, growing every day, and there was just no way of keeping the average man away from the evils of the Pantheon.
March 19th, 1812. Advertisement.
Sale by auction of entire cargo of ship Roxana, including 75 bags of birdseed, 50 bags of feathers, 8 cases of opium.
Those turn of the 19th century times were also tragic, and one sees in the daily death lists a terribly high proportion of children who might have survived today.
Causes of death during the week ending Monday morning at sunrise were consumption 4, croup 2, fits 2, and 1 each from convulsions, drowned, dysentery, childbed, old age, sudden death, dropsy, worms, and colic. Total, 11 adults, 6 children. July 2nd, 1812. Public notice.
A married woman with a fresh breast of milk will take a child to suckle.
Life was short, and there were other deaths as a result of the Second War with Great Britain in 1812. Another result was the first printing of the Star-Spangled Banner.
A gentleman had left Baltimore under a flag of truce for the purpose of getting released from the British, a friend of his.
At the time, during the siege of Baltimore Harbor, the gentleman's name, Francis Scott Key, was hardly considered worth mentioning.
I could hardly believe it. After a full night of bombardment, Fort McHenry had held. I felt the urge to write, to capture the moment in poetry. Oh, say, can you see, by the dawn's early light.
A scrap of poetry combined with an old drinking song that became the anthem of one of the world's greatest nations, distributed first in handbill form by the News-American. Its wars temporarily finished, the new nation and the city turned to making itself a better society. In Baltimore, America's first railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio, was begun on July 4th, 1828. So great was public excitement that nearly the entire city population attended the ceremonies.
A special march called the Carrollton March, written in honor of this occasion, will be played.
And a poem was penned describing the excitement.
Here's a road to be made with the pick and the spade, 'tis to reach to Ohio for the benefit of trade. Here are mountains to be leveled, here are valleys to be filled.
It was a proud time to be a Baltimorean. The city was the center of so much that was important.
The first gas-lighted public street in the country.
The American Farmer, the first agricultural publication in the United States.
The first regular transatlantic steam vessel sailed from Baltimore.
Mount Clair Station, this country's first railroad depot.
And the first American umbrella factory.
And so it was, established in Baltimore in 1828. Most Baltimoreans of 1830 celebrated the fact that man was being brought closer together by faster means of communication. Besides the B&O Railroad, Baltimore was the home of the clipper ships, which were the fastest sailing vessels in the world. But closer contact with other people brought problems, too. One was the spread of the much-feared cholera. Everyone was suspected of being a carrier.
August 20th, 1832. The fear of cholera seems to have deprived some people of their reason and humanity. Recently, Mr. David Ballou, aged 85, was on a journey one night from New York to Cumberland. After leaving the boat, he took a seat on the stagecoach. During this ride, he was taken sick. The stage passengers were alarmed, and attempts were made to leave him at some house, but...
Pardon, ma'am, but this gentleman has taken sick and...
No, not here. Take him away.
No one would receive him for fear of the cholera.
We can't just abandon the old man.
He's not riding in here.
I agree.
In this critical situation, he was denied a seat inside the stage, was taken out, and lashed to the top for the rest of the journey.
Strong medicine. But there was no way of knowing if the old man was ill of ordinary causes or had the dread disease. Fear of cholera produced many interesting theories as to its cause, cure, and prevention.
I say it's from wearing flannel next to the skin.
And I say it's from eating watermelons and cucumbers.
It was not known until much later, of course, that cholera was spread via bacteria in ordinary drinking water. Water was the culprit once again in 1837.
June 15th, 1837. By far the most extensive and destructive calamity with which the city of Baltimore has ever been visited was experienced on Wednesday night. A calamity so unlooked for.
It was the second great Jones Falls flood of the 19th century. Many would die, and the survivors would soon be busy trying to better themselves.
July 28th, 1837. State lottery of $75,000 offered.
Missing out on that, the average Baltimorean could seek to improve his mind.
January 1st, 1838.
Night school, number 26 North Gay Street. $3.50 per quarter, with books, lights, and fuels furnished by the teachers without any additional charge.
And it's also said that travel is broadening.
Fare between Baltimore and Harper's Ferry, 50 cents round trip.
Failing all else, one could always jockey for a better position with the Almighty.
January 30th, 1841.
Pew for sale.
An eligibly situated pew in the church will be sold at public sale at 1 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday next.
If day-to-day life occasionally seemed a little dull, there was always the unexpected to shake up the Baltimoreans, like the day a steamship blew up right in the harbor.
April 15th, 1842. It is our melancholy duty to record the most fearful and fatal steamboat explosion which has ever taken place on the waters of the Chesapeake. The new and splendid steamship Medora was yesterday rendered a wreck by the explosion of her boilers.
Some persons were blown in the air and fell on shore, in the water, or on the boats lying nearby.
Others were crushed with splintered timbers, scalded with steam, and not having time to escape, were drowned when the boat overturned and sank.
But Baltimoreans still believed in progress. And now, with Baltimore the nation's second largest city, progress was especially delightful, as with the exciting new means of communication which began in Baltimore.
What hath God wrought?
The first message sent by telegraph from one city to another.
May 29th, 1844. When the spectator sees the operator transmit a message by a wire from Baltimore to Washington and receive an answer back through the same medium, he cannot but be struck with wonder and admiration.
In honor of the occasion, the Independent Blues Band of Baltimore will play a piece especially written, entitled The Telegraph Quick Step.
The tune, dedicated to inventor Samuel F.B. Morse, celebrated the first time news of a presidential convention passed from one city to another within seconds. There was also progress for the sports fan. Baltimore started out to be the scene of the first heavyweight championship title fight in America. The key is started out to be.
February 8th, 1849. Up to a late hour on Tuesday evening, the public houses were crowded with a mass of those active in arrangements for the fight between Tom Hyer and Yankee Sullivan. But yesterday, they were all gone.
For in 1849, Baltimore's police force, officially at least, was against prize fighting. Warned that the police would break up the fight, Hyer and Sullivan left Baltimore for a wooded area on the shores of Kent County. And there, the battle for the first World Championship heavyweight title was fought.
With little difficulty, he struck down Sullivan's guard, caught his head under his left arm, and dealt him with his huge right fist a torrent of blows to the face and over the head. Then Hyer released his hold, and Sullivan dropped senseless and bleeding to the earth.
The winner and world champion, Tom Hyer.
Thus the brutal and disgusting exhibition closed.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary.
That same year, Edgar Allan Poe died in Baltimore and was buried in the Presbyterian churchyard. The Swedish nightingale, Jenny Lind, came to Baltimore the following year, even before her voice was heard.
What am I bid for the honor of purchasing the first ticket to Miss Lind's opening concert? All right, I have $10. $10, 25, 50, 50, 75, 100, 100. Sold to G.W. Whitehurst, proprietor of the Daguerrean Gallery.
Not only were the concerts fully attended, often with people seated on the stage itself, but all Baltimore loved her. The 1840s were pleasant times for the reader of the News-American. As the decade ended and a new one began, even women seemed to be making progress in breaking away from their stereotyped image.
Miss Julia Beverly advertises that she will
Practice as a medicine man and surgeon and cure the cholera or chop off a leg at rates the most accommodating.
In 1851, an enterprising Baltimorean, one Jacob Fossell, a milk dealer, started this country's first commercial ice cream operation. There was profit, too, in pleasing yet another taste for Baltimoreans.
March 15th, 1856. Advertisement.
Italian macaroni and vermicelli, fresh and in a good order. Recently arrived per Brig Samuel from Sicily.
Another arrival, unexpected as usual. Jones Falls overflowed again in 1858.
Sweeping off outhouses, fences, livestock, and inundating several whole squares of that central portion of the city.
Bringing great misery to the people, as well as a flood of letters to the city government, demanding that something be done to protect the lives and property of Baltimoreans. The only answer was that the wrath of nature was not easily stilled. Nor in the turbulent 1850s was the wrath of man or woman.
April 9th, 1859. Few events have occurred in the history of Baltimore that have more deeply and solemnly agitated her citizens than that which was consummated in the jail yard yesterday morning.
Gambrill, Crop, Cyphus, Quarry, may the Lord have mercy on your souls.
The simultaneous execution of 4 men of itself is enough. Even worse was the appearance of more than 2,000 women in the crowd of 15 to 20,000.
The chaos of the 1850s extended into the summer of 1860, when Baltimore was the scene of the nation-shattering Democratic Convention, during which, perhaps symbolically, the stage collapsed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats.
Mr. President, the whole platform hasn't broken down. Only one plank got loose. But New York and Pennsylvania have gone down together.
Order! Order!
The cries for order were futile. A nation filled with regional frustration and anger opted instead for war. On the seam of the rupture was Baltimore. Unlike any other city in the nation during the Civil War, hers was truly a population of divided loyalties.
Mr. Mesner, arrested for having concealed beneath a pile of coal in the cellar a U.S. musket, a bird gun, and cavalry sword.
Amanda M. Featherston, saluting Confederate prisoners.
Captain Robert Benthall, charged with having broken up a gun so as to prevent it from being serviceable to the government.
Terence McCann, receiving rebel letters for the purpose of delivery.
During the month of July, 1863, arrests were made of 341 persons by the military authorities. February 15th, 1866, advertisement.
Sale of surplus government mules, all good, will be sold at public auction by office of assistant quartermaster.
Life settled down to normal.
January 18th, 1868, advertisement for a weekly magazine.
The number for January is now ready and contains a splendid, original, and true story. How I made a fortune in Wall Street and how I got married. Written by a gentleman of great experience for 10 cents.
Making a killing on the stock market has long been an exciting thought. That summer, the Jones Falls once again brought its own special excitement to the city.
Saturday, July 25th, 1868. A terrible calamity. 6 city bridges destroyed. Many lives lost. Baltimore was visited yesterday with a flood that we think has never been equaled in our past history.
There were all the things Baltimoreans had learned to expect of a major flood. But there was another side to the flood, and some lucky Baltimoreans found that, too.
Armed with boathooks and grappling tongs, they fished eagerly for the valuable articles, the flotsam and jetsam of the great flood. Some of them appropriated to themselves as many as 5 or 6 barrels of whiskey or salted meats, while others laid in a fair stock of furniture, such as chairs, tables, lounges, and in some instances, bureaus and wardrobes.
Nero fiddled while Rome burned. So who could blame those who fished while Baltimore flooded? And who could blame the curious who afterwards ventured out to see what had happened to their city?
The flood pretty well subsided. Many thousands of persons were wading through the mud left in the streets to witness the scenes of destruction.
At the corner of Gay and Hillen, a barn, a roof and loft, with a quantity of hay in it, from somewhere in Baltimore County, came to a halt, nearly blocking the whole street.
An immense tree from up country was driven into Front Street and came to like an anchor.
All of the market benches in the upper market house are jammed into the lower market and remain in confusion.
The mayor had this proclamation inserted in the same issue of the News-American.
Mayor Banks gives notice that Center Market will be closed today.
And so, in the end, the common man viewed the flood as an irritating interruption in his life.
March 14th, 1870. Advertisement.
Come see butter made in 5 minutes by the patent atmospheric and hydraulic churn dasher at less than 20 cents a pound. New fresh butter churning depot.
Man still retained his basic optimism during the 1870s. And he was still in love with the railroad, so much so that a popular song of 1872 was about a Baltimore and Ohio engine numbered 29 and nicknamed the Thatcher Perkins.
Clear the track, the bell is ringing, here she comes on time. Thatcher Perkins is the builder of the 29. Clear the track, the bell is ringing, here she comes on time. Thatcher Perkins is the builder of the 29.
Decidedly most bold, daring, and well executed.
The News-American writer of 1872 wasn't applauding the music of songwriter Will S. Hayes. Instead, his enthusiasm was for one of the most interesting bank robberies in Baltimore history.
Yes, I'm John Giddings, owner of the property next to the Third National Bank.
Good. My name is Stabler. We should like to rent the building, sir, for a new business venture.
The new business venture turned out to be the burrowing of a tunnel from Mr. Giddings' building into the vault of the Third National Bank.
August 20th, 1872. Any vulgar ruffian can buy a crowbar and force open a door and help himself to whatever happens to be within his reach. But these adroit scoundrels planned and executed a robbery that required the greatest cunning, the highest merchandising skill, because they were obliged to make large investments and to wait patiently until the opportunity came for turning them into money.
Nearly $250,000. When the bank was open for business on Monday morning, August 19th, 1872, the Third National's vault was
totally empty. That is how the streets of Baltimore are this fall day.
The cause of the sudden quietness on Baltimore's streets was a strange epidemic of horse influenza called epizootic. Because the horse was man's prime mover a century ago, the disease's sudden appearance wrought untold hardship.
October 26th, 1872. We have seen milkmen delivering their wares by wheelbarrow, a car loaded with light lumber drawn by 4 men, the fire department forced to use manpower to haul its engines.
The strange disease passed, and once again the horse became man's frequently rebellious servant.
January 25th, 1873. Last evening, a horse attached to a light wagon ran away, and when at the corner of Poppleton Street, a young man named Henry Colt was passing, and he, supposing that the horse would run over him, darted into the saloon. Perhaps the animal thought if a beer saloon was a proper place for a colt to visit, it was also a proper place for a full-grown horse to enter. At all events, he did enter. As the animal entered the bar room, he ran against a table, around which were seated 4 men playing cards.
Look out!
What? The horse upset the table, greatly to the consternation of the persons in the room. When the bartender had recovered from his fright, he asked,
"Was willst du haben, a glass of beer?"
The horse, in his entrance and exit through the door of the saloon, destroyed glass and woodwork to the amount of $25. A day never to be forgotten.
This was a different day, with far greater destruction and cost.
July 25th, 1873. 4 squares blotted out, 100 houses in ashes, 1,000 homeless.
It was the first great Baltimore fire, which ushered in the 2nd century of the News-American with a grisly burst of excitement.
Flames would shoot up in several places at once, and in a short time there were 18 homes on fire, on Park, Clay, and Saratoga Street.
Moving this way!
There's no stopping it.
Those in the vicinity were in the greatest consternation. All along Lexington from Park nearly up to Howard, people were hastily dragging their furniture and clothing from the houses, and the streets were soon heaped high with household goods. Men with wagons and drays were endeavoring to force their way to the scene.
Oh, my God!
Help us, dear Lord.
Women ran to and fro, wringing their hands and moaning in hysterical grief over the destruction of their homes. July 28, 1873. A noted courtesan, whose house was burnt, persists in asserting that she lost
$20,000 worth of diamond jewelry.
And a crowd surrounds her house, gazing at the ruins, eager to commence explorations in this new diamond mine.
In 1883, a Baltimore watchmaker gave the world something worth far more than a few diamonds. Otmar Mergenthaler invented the world's first typesetting machine and revolutionized the printing and publishing industries. That same year, Baltimoreans had another first, the first vocational school in the country, Baltimore Polytechnic.
Here it comes, the new horseless horse car.
Oh, my lands.
It was 1885, and our country's first commercial electric streetcar line began passenger operations between Baltimore and Hampton. Naturally, the event was duly celebrated.
Baltimore has 10 times as many saloons as churches.
The following year, a religious revival was a great attraction.
That's right, 2,700 saloons. I believe whiskey is good in its place, but that place is hell.
1893, and Baltimoreans were the first in the country to have an elevated electric railway. Score another one for Baltimore.
September 26, 1894. The pennant is won beyond a doubt. Even should the Orioles lose every game and the envious New Yorkers win all they have to play. Today's hard-fought victory over Cleveland settled the matter, and for at least a year to come, the pennant will fly from the flagpole at Union Park.
It was the Baltimore Orioles' first of 3 consecutive pennants during the 90s. As the 19th century ended and the 20th century began, Baltimore had a string of firsts. The B&O put the world's first electric railway locomotive into service. The first submarine of practical value, the Argonaut, was built in Baltimore. And in 1901, at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Dr. Florence Sabin became the first woman professor at a medical school.
February 9th, 1904. Baltimore's awful calamity. Public awed by the horror.
It was the Baltimore fire of 1904 which virtually destroyed the entire downtown area. The buildings housing the News-American were victims of the flames. Both the paper and the city rebuilt and grew in stature and culture. By 1914, Baltimore was the nation's first city to operate a municipal band. And in 1916, it was the first in the country with a municipal symphony orchestra for people of moderate means. But other diversions, it seems, still managed to attract attention.
January 22nd, 1917. Ban on nude in movies.
The nude in motion picture art has come under the ban of the Board of Review.
World War I, when young men were actually trying to enlist weeks before war was even declared.
March 26th, 1917. Yesterday was the biggest day in local recruiting. From early morning, young men with red blood in their veins and a love of country in their hearts applied for enlistment. And at midnight, many were still waiting to be examined.
War came, then ended, and was soon replaced by other thoughts for Baltimoreans.
September 5th, 1925. Mrs. Rachel R.J. is 86 years old, but that did not prevent her from entering the Cherry Flapper essay contest and winning a $5 prize, in which she blames the wrongdoings of the modern girl upon the girl's parents.
Lots of girls of today are allowed to do as they please, dress as they please, and go anywhere they please. Some mothers let their girls dress as boys, jump and ride on bikes behind boys, and go out into the country, with the mother not knowing where her daughter is going or what she will do. Now, when I was a girl and wanted even to go to see a girlfriend, I had to ask my mother's permission.
October 4th, 1929. Hounds unleashed for autumn as society goes hunting.
The chase was shortly to become more panic than frolic for wealthy society, as the hunt was for disappearing fortunes.
October 30th, 1929. A feeling of growing optimism was apparent in the local financial district today. Faces had lost the expression of anxiety which characterized them yesterday. The belief was strongly held that the crisis was past.
Unfortunately, it was only the beginning of an almost worldwide depression.
November 1st, 1929. Advertisement. Effective today, prices of Ford cars and trucks will be reduced. Roadster, $435, reduction $15. Standard Coupe, $500, reduction
Soon,
$50.
prices for everything went down. But factories closed, and jobs were not to be found. So few people had the money to buy anything but absolute necessities, and many didn't have that.
In 1918, when the fate of this nation hung in the balance, hundreds of thousands of young men came to the colors.
A lady writing to the News-American explained why she was sympathetic to the 1932 bonus marchers.
Now, in 1932, when those lads are hungry and ragged and their wives and children starving, I believe it is the patriotic duty of every honest American to do whatever can be done to help them.
We were promised a bonus for fighting in the war. We want it now, not later.
And we'll stay here in Washington until we get it.
They need help now, not 10 years from now. That is the reason I gave to the bonus expeditionary forces, headed by Commander Waters, the land at my farm in Waterbury, Maryland, on which to establish their new camp after the armed soldiers of President Hoover drove them out of Washington. I feel very bitterly about the treatment these men and their poor families have received at the hands of the government they fought to save. And I believe the nation feels as bitterly as I do.
It was a depression that lasted 8 years and became a way of life for the nation as well as the average Baltimorean.
December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace.
Fill her up.
Listen, buddy, don't you know there's a war on?
World War II was, for the average Baltimorean not in the service, a time of gas rationing, food rationing, long hours of work, practice blackouts, and something else.
May the 1st, 1942. Catonsville had a severe air raid last night, and casualties were heavy. 15 ambulances zipped about, bringing scores of wounded to the Catonsville High School gymnasium.
Altogether, about 700 people, many of them boy messengers on bicycles, took part.
May 4th, 1942. During the air raid the other night, at the casualty station in the Catonsville High Gym, a stretcher came in, and from a group of nurses, there was a high-pitched scream.
Bob, what on earth happened to you?
I'm a casualty, Mom.
There was a lot of good-natured banter and kidding, because she hadn't the faintest notion that her son had been assigned to be brought in as a casualty.
The bombing was imaginary, of course, in what was one of many tests conducted by the civilian defense. After the Second War, there were new problems. Like his predecessor, 20th century man faced the problems and tried to solve them, even if confused at times, as when Traffic Commissioner Henry Barnes came to town to unsnarl our traffic and also try to make it easier to cross downtown streets.
September 30th, 1955. To remove the menace of a turning car, it is necessary to halt all traffic and give pedestrians all-way clearance during that interval. The resulting movement resembles a figure in an old-fashioned square or Barnes dance.
But sometimes the confusion was a joyful one.
December 30th, 1958. World champions. What a wonderful lift this supreme title, hard-earned by the Baltimore Colts, has given the sports-starved city and state. October the 11th, 1966. It was one for the books. The celebration Baltimore gave the Orioles. We won the World Series.
Then, almost as if to remind Baltimore that nature is still the ultimate boss, Jones Falls once again overflowed her banks in 1972. But, once again, Baltimore survived. Is there a lesson to be learned from the 2 centuries during which Baltimore and the News-American, her only uninterrupted diary, coexisted? One lesson might be that good men, like good newspapers, somehow develop a quiet satisfaction at just being able to see life, experience it, report it. For when tomorrow comes, it will bring with it a new edition. Whatever it contains, the most important thing we can ask is the privilege of just being here.